Okay, let's dive in. We've got this stack of sources you've provided, articles, reports, some really fascinating testimony excerpts. And our mission, really, in this deep dive is to cut through all the noise. We want to unpack the core ideas, maybe some surprising facts, and, the key insights hidden in there.
Exactly. To give you a clear picture of two very different but honestly equally compelling stories playing out in Brazil recently.
Two distinct things happening.
That's right. And both, I think, really highlight the complexities you find when you look past the headlines. So first up, we'll dig into the analysis, the reactions, all swirling around a pretty high-profile political deposition.
Okay. And
then we completely shift gears. We're going to look at this apparent paradox involving Brazil's betting industry. It's huge right now.
Right.
And there's a list of celebrities being looked at, plus what seems like a major contradiction in government policy.
So contrasting views, maybe unexpected links, and trying to figure out the different forces at work, all based on these sources you've given us.
Precisely. Let's start with that first one, the deposition.
Okay, right. The recent deposition of former President Bolsonaro. He was before Supreme Court Justice Alexandre de Moraes.
Yeah, a big event. And, these things often play out very publicly.
Totally. And predictably, the sources show it sparked immediate, very divided political reactions. No surprise there.
Absolutely not. You see the split right away. The left, from their viewpoint, they framed it as Bolsonaro kind of stumbling, maybe faltering under the questions. Meanwhile, the right was insisting, no, he handled it smoothly. He held his ground.
And his own legal team, lawyer Paulo Bueno specifically, was super quick to spin it positively, wasn't he?
Oh, immediately. Saying the deposition made it absolutely clear there was no coup attempt. That was their line.
Right. And Bueno's argument, well, based on how the defense reads the situation, was that the questions themselves mostly sidestep direct to talk.
Yeah, that's what they claimed. Focus more on things like Bolsonaro's live streams, past meetings, that sort of thing.
And the defense line is basically, he rejected any unconstitutional ideas, didn't commit any crimes.
Yeah.
Simple as that from their side.
And it's interesting, your initial take from the sources also picked up on something. While Bolsonaro seemed to handle it okay, relatively speaking, neither Justice Moraes nor the Prosecutor General Paulo Gonet really seemed to apply massive pressure.
Yeah, that was a point raised.
And one perspective in the sources was, well, maybe their minds are just already made up. It's either way.
Kind of makes you wonder about the whole strategy behind the questioning itself, doesn't it?
Exactly. And that leads right into the media critique, which really stood out in the sources.
Oh, yeah. What was that?
Journalists like Andrea Sadi and Octavio Guedes from Globo News, they basically felt the interrogators weren't sharp enough, not incisive.
Okay.
They pointed specifically to that alleged coup plotting document. The one former aide, Mauro said, testified Bolsonaro actually edited.
Ah, right, that document.
Yeah.
Crucial piece.
Hugely crucial. And their point, the critique, was that Moraes and Gonet kind of failed to really press Bolsonaro on that specific detail about the document.
So less dynamic questioning.
Yeah, exactly. Instead of, dynamically following up on his answers, which is often key in these things, right?
Yeah.
It felt to them like they stuck too closely to just the pre-prepared questions.
And why is that specific point, the document editing, so vital, according to this critique?
Well, Sadi, for example, she highlighted that the moment a defendant gives an explanation, that's precisely when you have to dig deeper, right?
Makes sense.
If Bolsonaro gives an explanation about a document or a meeting, you need those very specific follow-ups. Who edited it? Were you there? If not you, then who? Did you okay it?
We got him down.
Yeah. And that approach, according to the critique, just wasn't really used enough, especially concerning the documents Sid brought up. It's seen as a missed opportunity to challenge his story head-on about a central piece of evidence.
So the criticism isn't just about Bolsonaro's performance, but the actual process of the interrogation.
Yeah.
Did it effectively probe the really sensitive stuff?
Precisely. It definitely raises questions about the strategic choices made, during the deposition from the prosecution side.
Then we also saw a legal analyst, Pierpaolo Bottini, offering another angle.
Right.
He noted Bolsonaro's defense tries to frame everything he did as just, legitimate criticism of the electronic voting system.
Standard defense line for him.
But Bottini, looking at the prosecution's likely case, explains their argument is that the conduct went way further than just criticism.
Yes, exactly. The prosecution's view, as Bottini and others interpret it in the sources, is that this involves alleged talks about authoritarian decrees with military leaders.
Okay.
And alleged attempts to mess with or delay an army report on election integrity.
Right.
Which, from their perspective, points to a concrete plan, maybe an intention, not just political talk or complaining.
So it's a fundamental difference in framing the same actions.
Totally.
Defense says just criticism. Prosecution potentially says, no, this was an active plan. Huge gap in how you read the source material there.
Absolutely huge. And that's why the specific questions around things like that document become so critical. It's where those different narratives really collide.
We also saw some specific moments during the deposition itself that really grabbed attention in the sources.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Well, there was that clip where Bolsonaro was complaining about what he called censorship by the Electoral Court back in the 2022 campaign.
Ah, yes. A familiar theme for him.
Right. He mentioned being blocked from using certain images, talking about certain topics related to Lula, his opponent. He felt it hurt his campaign. It's his long-running grievance with the TSE, basically.
Mm-hmm. Fits his narrative. And then there were those other comments. The ones that went beyond the immediate legal stuff and really stirred the political pot.
Yes. One source highlighted him calling the January 8th protesters malucos.
Malucos, yeah. Basically nuts or lunatics.
Which feels, wow. I mean, incredibly significant, right?
Yeah.
Many of those people are now in jail.
Facing serious sentences.
For actions taken that day. Actions fueled, arguably, by some of his own rhetoric, challenging the election, to just dismiss them as malucos.
Uh-huh.
It seems like a really striking, maybe politically tricky statement for him to make.
Oh, absolutely. It creates this real tension, doesn't it? Especially for his base. They might see those protesters very differently, maybe as patriots, you know?
Right.
So calling them malucos publicly, especially during legal proceedings related to those events, yeah, it's a move that makes you ask a lot of questions about his strategy, his relationship with his hardcore supporters. It's a fascinating detail from the sources.
And speaking of politically tricky moves,
Yeah.
that other moment highlighted. The exchange where Bolsonaro apparently joked about inviting Justice Alexandre de Moraes to be his running mate in 2026.
Oh, boy. Yeah, I saw that mentioned. And Moraes, unsurprisingly, said no thanks.
I mean, this specific interaction, what was the intent there?
Who knows? To invite the very guy many of his supporters see as enemy number one.
The one investigating him.
To be his vice president. Some in the sources saw it as just totally inappropriate given the context. Maybe political maneuvering. Maybe even a cynical attempt to, I don't know, build a bridge while kind of dissing his own loyalists who hate Moraes.
Just bizarre optics, whatever the reason.
Technically bizarre.
So, okay, while the defense might say the deposition went fine, these specific comment, the Malucos thing, that VP joke, they definitely stirred up a lot of talk and critique across the board. Adds layers to how people are reading this whole event.
It really shows how every single word gets dissected in this kind of high-stakes situation, and how moments that seem almost offhand can actually reveal a lot about the underlying political currents and tensions.
Okay, let's switch gears now. Let's transition from that whole political and legal arena to something that seems totally different on the surface, but also involves these conflicting forces and motives that you only really see when you dig into the sources. Let's talk about Brazil's, well, booming betting industry and this recent legislative investigation.
All right. You're talking about the CPI das Bets.
Exactly.
So a CPI, for listeners, Comissão Parlamentar de Inquérito, basically a parliamentary commission of inquiry, a big legislative investigation.
And the final report from this CPI is out now, led by Senator Soraya Thronica. And based on the sources you shared, it names names.
It certainly does. The report suggests quite a few well-known figures, actually, many from the sort of influencer world, could face indictment based on what they found. We're talking about alleged involvement in shady betting schemes, maybe money laundering, promoting illegal gambling.
And especially misleading advertising aimed at their followers, right? That seemed like a big focus.
Yeah, huge focus. The list is pretty notable. Influencer Virginia Fonseca was mentioned early on as potentially facing indictment.
Okay.
The report also apparently cites names like Adélia Soares, who was on Big Brother Brazil, and a businessman named Daniel Pardim. Accusations linking them to some kind of international betting mafia. And Pardim might even face false testimony charges related to the inquiry itself.
Wow. And Deolane Bezerra is also mentioned?
Yep, her and associates from a betting house called Zirlom. Potential charges there related to illegal gambling operations, maybe even forming a criminal organization, according to the report.
Jeez.
And Virginia Fonseca comes up again alongside another influencer, Pâmela Drudi. They're specifically accused of promoting bets using, like, totally unrealistic simulations, basically fooling their followers.
Oh, so?
Well, the source material suggests they might have used demo accounts in their promo videos, accounts designed to always win.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which, if true, is obviously super deceptive, and the CPI report took that very seriously.
Okay, so that's quite a list. Significant allegations coming out of this parliamentary inquiry. That's one side of the story. An investigation leading to potential indictments, trying to regulate and crack down on iffy stuff in the betting world.
Right. Seems like a legislative effort, driven by concerns about fraud, illegal betting, protecting the public from scams. Makes sense.
BUT. And here is where the paradox, the contradiction that the sources identify really jumps out and gets fascinating.
Okay, lay it on us.
Well,
this is where that tension becomes really clear, isn't it? The very same CPI report that's recommending these indictments, highlighting all the dangers.
yeah.
It also proposes measures to actually restrict betting. For example, banning people registered in the Cadunico social welfare program from betting at all.
Okay, hang on. Cadunico, that's the main registry for social programs in Brazil, right?
Right.
It identifies low-income families.
Exactly, the single registry. So proposing to ban people on that list from betting. While it sounds like a move genuinely aimed at protecting vulnerable people.
That's the stated rationale, right?
It seems to be. The report says it's out of concern for low-income families who might be, particularly susceptible to gambling risks. They also suggested limiting the operating hours for betting sites. So those recommendations seem focused on public welfare, protection.
Okay, that seems straightforward enough. Protect the vulnerable, BUT, simultaneously.
Mm-hmm.
The sources are highlighting that a totally different part of the Brazilian government, the Ministry of Finance, is reportedly pushing tech giants, Apple and Google, really hard to allow official sports betting apps onto their main app stores.
Yeah.
For Android and iOS.
And that is the absolute heart of the paradox, because right now, these tech companies have been pretty reluctant.
Why?
They cite reputational risk, basically, concerns about facilitating illegal stuff, fraud. Google, for instance, has really tight rules globally about betting apps in Brazil. It's mostly just horse racing and federal lotteries allowed.
Okay.
But the Ministry of Finance is pushing them to change that, arguing that regulated official betting apps should be easy to find and download through these massive platforms.
So let me get this straight. You have one government body, the CPI, worried about the impact on low-income folks, proposing restrictions, while another government body, the Finance Ministry, is pushing to make betting more accessible, potentially to everyone, by getting apps into the two biggest official mobile stores.
That's the perceived contradiction staring us in the face, based on these sources. It's pretty stark.
What's the government's argument for more access, then?
Well, the government and the betting companies themselves, they argue that having official regulated apps in the stores is actually a good thing. It's a tool to fight the illegal market.
How so?
The idea is you divert users away from shady, unregulated sites towards platforms where, crucially, bets can be taxed and monitored. That's the official line.
Okay. But the underlying motive, as sort of hinted at in the source material, it's less about directing people to legal platforms for their own safety and more about
tax revenue.
Bingo.
That's the core tension the sources really point to. Make betting easier to access via official apps. You potentially get more people betting overall. And crucially, the government gets to tax that revenue from all those regulated bets. It really seems like the desire to grab a bigger slice of this, frankly, multi-billion-dollar industry might be a huge driver behind the push for app accessibility.
Even while other parts of the government are publicly wringing their hands about the impact on vulnerable groups.
Exactly. It really makes you look at the stated reasons for policies with a more critical eye, doesn't it? How do you balance that push for tax money from a potentially harmful market with genuine concerns about its social costs?
Yeah, it's a classic dilemma.
It is. And the sources really highlight that different bits of the government might just be prioritizing different things, welfare versus economic gain. And that leads to these actions that look, contradictory regarding the very same industry.
It shows that understanding policy often means you got to look for those competing priorities, those underlying motivations that aren't always shouted from the rooftops.
You got it.
Fascinating stuff. Okay, so let's quickly recap our deep dive today. We looked at the complex fallout from Jair Bolsonaro's deposition, explored the different political takes, left and right, the media critiques about the interrogation itself, and those controversial comments Bolsonaro made that sparked so much discussion.
Yeah, highlighting how the sources really offer different ways to view the event and what it all means.
And then we peeled back the layers on this Brazil betting industry story. From that list of big names potentially facing indictment based on the CPI report.
Right, and the specific allegations against them.
To that really striking paradox.
Yeah.
Government bodies proposing betting restrictions out of welfare concerns, while also pushing hard to make betting more accessible via app stores, seemingly chasing that tax revenue.
Yeah, diving into these sources just reveals so many perspectives, so many competing interests in these big national events. You've got legal defenses, political spin, media critiques, regulatory ideas, financial motives. It's never just a simple story, is it?
Never.
And it's about realizing that the official narratives, sometimes they can hide these conflicting priorities or goals within different parts of the government. You really have to look for those tensions.
Which I guess leads us perfectly to our final provocative thought for you, the listener, to chew on.
Okay.
When different parts of the government, or maybe different sources you read, present what seem like totally contradictory approaches to the same issue, whether it's regulating a market like betting or assessing a legal event like that deposition, how do you figure out what the real underlying goals are? Or what the true impact on the public might be?
What layers are you missing if you only look at one piece of the puzzle?
Exactly. It's just a reminder, really, to always look beyond the surface, try to identify those competing forces. That feels like a key takeaway from sorting through all these diverse sources today.
Always question the stated purpose, maybe, and look for the other pressures that might be at play.
Well said. Until next time.